Welcome to Uniquely Female Troubles. My name is Leslie Wells. Today I want to tell you about the Bible verses and what I believe they meant when I was still in the cult that kept me trapped in the marriage. I felt like if I didn't go along with what my husband wanted me to do, and almost all the time, or to leave him would be wrong. And that teaching was reinforced by the cult, and it was reinforced by him. What I do want to say right off the bat and all through this, I do not believe now, at this point in my life, that these Bible verses mean that a woman has to stay in an abusive situation. I don't believe that at all. So, and some of these I don't really know what they believe, what they mean now, because I know what I used to think they believe and what they mean. But I definitely don't think that anything in the Bible gives one person the choice to abuse another person. And I also don't believe that there's anything in the Bible that says a person has to hang around and be abused. So the first one I want to tell you about is 1 Corinthians 7, 4 through 5. Now this one of all of them, this one hurt me the most. It was used in the most detrimental way towards me. I'm going to read you from the King James Version because when we were in the cult, that was the only Bible we used. So, in 1 Corinthians 7, 4 through 5, it says, "The wife hath not power of her own body, but the husband. And likewise also the husband hath not power over his own body, but the wife. Defraud ye not one the other, except it be with consent for a time, that you may give yourself to fasting and prayer, and come together again, that Satan tempt you not for your incontinency." So this basically what I was taught to believe. And, I can't really say how much of it came from my ex, how much of it came from the cult. A lot of it came from the cult. But he also took things and emphasized them, or overemphasized them. According to this, my body is his property. And his body is my property. The only difference between us is I never wanted to hurt my property, which was his body. But he felt like my body was his property. He used to grab parts of my body and say, I'm not going to say the words he said, but he said, "These blank are mine, that blank is mine." And I hated it when he said that, but I felt like the Bible said the same thing, which is so messed up when you think about it. And sometimes it got to the point where I felt like, like if you have an old used couch in your garage and you don't keep it clean, you don't take care of it. If somebody decided to rip it apart and the stuffing would be coming out, or somebody poured motor oil all over it, you can do that if you want to, because that's your couch. It's your property. And I felt like that. That's what I felt like I was. Nothing more to him. And sometimes nothing more to myself, or maybe not even in the eyes of God. But that's so wrong. And that's not what the Bible teaches. And I believe with all my heart that God does not want people to abuse each other. Whether it's a husband abusing wife, husband. In no situation does God condone abuse. So, but yeah, I felt like I was some old couch in somebody's garage that anybody could do not anybody, that my ex, when we were married, could do anything he wanted to. And that's just not right. It's definitely not right. So the next one is the one that we all know about. Let me see. Oh, no, actually, that's not the next one. Colossians 3, 18 through 19. It says, "Wives, submit yourself unto your own husbands, as it is fit in the Lord. Husbands, love your wives, and be not bitter against them." So it's telling wives to submit, which I was taught that meant obey. I've heard other ideas since then about what submit really is, but I kind of think that is the definition of it. And it says that husbands are supposed to love their wives. So, and one thing I will say is I was really frustrated when I was married and when I was in the cult, because there is no plan B. And it tells you to submit yourself to your husband and obey him. And in the cult, they said that you don't have to obey him if he tells you to do something that's like against the Bible. So the example they always gave is like if your husband tells you to cut your hair. Well, he never told me to cut my hair, but that was the big one they always use. But it could be anything, like wear pants. I mean, those are two of the worst things a woman could do in the cult, is wear pants or cut your hair. But you know what's interesting is what if, isn't it against the Bible to tell someone to hurt somebody? If he would have told me to punch somebody, I would have said no. But yet I went along with him hurting me because I thought I had to do that to follow the Bible. And there wasn't physical violence after the first 2 years, but there was all this other horrible stuff. So that, I think that's really interesting when you think about it, that why don't we realize that he's telling me to let him hurt me? Isn't that telling me to do something that's against the Bible? I think it is now. I didn't realize that then. So the next one is 1 Timothy 2:11 through 14. So it says, "Let the women learn in silence with all subjection. But I suffer not a woman to teach, nor to usurp authority over the man, but to be in silence. For Adam was first formed, and then Eve. And Adam was not deceived, but the woman, being deceived, was in the transgression." So this is saying that Adam was created first, and then Eve. And if you go back to Genesis, this is another thing I was taught, that if you go back to Genesis, you will see it. There's two accounts. Chapter 1 is one account of creation, and then chapter 2 is another account of the same creation. They're not the same. People try to find a way to harmonize them, and maybe that's possible. I don't know, but they're not the same. And so let me see. In Genesis 2:18 and 19, it says, "And the Lord said, It is not good that the man should be alone. I will make an helpmeet for him. And out of the ground the Lord formed every beast of the field and every fowl of the air, and brought them to Adam to see what he would call them. And whatsoever he called them, every living creature, that was the name thereof." Sorry for all that stumbling. So I was taught, for one, that we were not part of the original creation. So it's kind of interesting, like, wow, God created the earth and everything in it and all the animals, and he created Adam, and all the other animals were created, like, they were both genders. But Adam, it was presented like the only reason God even created women was so Adam would not be alone, and that he would have a helper. And this word, help me, I was definitely taught meant a helper. Like, I was supposed to help him meet his goals or do whatever it was he needed me to do to help him to be successful. And I don't really mean successful in business, because that wasn't really something that was ever emphasized in the cult. I just mean in life and as a man of God. And I was also taught, this is straight from the cult, that it would have like contaminated God to create us as part of the original creation, because we're so evil and bad. And that even though he created us, that Satan designed us. And he designed us, the only reason he designed us the way he did is to make men sin. And that's really the whole point. Also, that we're 1,000 times more easily deceived than a man, because we were not part of the original creation. And so if my husband and I disagreed about something, then he always made sure to remind me of that I'm 1,000 more times easily deceived than he is, which is not true. Anyway, so, and then another thing, so after Adam and Eve eat the fruit and they're banished from the garden, and then God curses the serpent, he curses the woman, and he doesn't curse Adam, he curses the ground for Adam's sake. So, yeah, he said, "Cursed is the ground for thy sake." That's the part addressing Adam. But I'm going to read you what he said to Eve. "Unto the woman he said, I will greatly multiply thy sorrow, and thy conception in sorrow. Thou shalt bring forth children, and thy desire shall be to thy husband, and he shall rule over thee." So, we were taught that the sorrow in bringing forth the children was the pain that we would be in. I mean, we were supposed to think of having another baby as a great thing, no matter how many kids you already had, which I didn't have the problem of having too many kids. I had the problem is it took us forever to even have one kid, and that's all we had. But the main thing is thy husband shall rule over thee. And that's what we were taught, that the reason we existed was for him. So, and then let's see, in Ephesians is, I think, the most quoted passage that talks about men and women and about marriage. So in verse 21 is really interesting. So this is Ephesians chapter 5, and verse 21 says, "Submitting yourselves one to another in the fear of God." Now, when they read this passage to us, they never included verse 21 in talking about husbands and wives. They always started at verse 22. But verse 21 is actually part of verse 20. It's part of the same sentence. So I don't know if it should be included or not, but it never was. But they start in verse 22, and it says, "Wives, submit yourselves unto your own husbands as unto the Lord. For the husband is the head of the wife, even as Christ is the head of the church, and he is the Savior of the body. Therefore, as the church is subject unto Christ, so let the wives be to their own husbands in everything." Everything. It says everything. Yeah. And also, when it says that we are supposed to submit to our husbands, it says as the church is, subject to Christ, that meant we were supposed to submit to our husbands like as unto God, the same way, with the same type of obedience. And then it says, "Husbands, love your wives, even as Christ also loved the church, and gave himself for it, that he might sanctify and cleanse it with the washing of the water of the word." So then it goes on and talks about that. And then it says, "So ought men to love their wives as their own bodies. He that loveth his wife loveth himself." And I asked my ex that once, like, aren't you supposed to love me like you love your own body? You're hurting me. And he said that he's not asking me to do anything that he wouldn't do. So he is loving me like he loves his own body, which is kind of pretty ridiculous. So it says, "For no man ever yet hated his own flesh, but nourish it and cherish it." I'm sorry. I'm not so used to talking in this King James English anymore. "Even as the Lord the church." So then it goes down a little bit, but, and then in verse 33, it ends with, "Let every one of you in particular so love his wife, even as himself, and the wife see that she reverence her husband." That was such a huge thing with us, that, that was always pounded into our heads. And my ex had these verses memorized, and he could just tell me how much I'm not doing them. And one of the ones that he liked to quote at me was all the way at the end of the book of Revelation, in Revelation 21:8. if I said something that he didn't think was true, he would tell me, okay, I'm going to read you the whole verse, but he would just tell me part of it. Okay, this is Revelation chapter 21, verse 8. But the fearful and unbelieving and the abominable and murderers and whoremongers and sorcerers and idolaters and all liars shall have their part in the lake, which burneth with fire and brimstone, which is the second death. And if I said something he didn't like, he would just say, all liars have their place in the lake of fire, and, letting me know that's where I was going to end up. So I don't know. I say I hated it, and I did, but at the same time, it got to the point where, just like a lot of other stuff he said and did all the time, that was odious and obnoxious. I tried as much as possible to ignore it and to not let it bother me. And I don't really know how much I succeeded in that. I believe a lot. I know a lot of it sunk in. There was just this constant drip, 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 like a Chinese water torture. And, that has to wear away at people. I mean, that wears away at rocks. A rock can be eroded just with a drip, drip, drip. And I lived for 22 years with the drip, drip, drip constantly coming at me. So when I tried to think about how I responded to my husband, and first of all, I want to say I was not successful in doing what I tried to do. Sometimes I succeeded, but most of the time I reacted like a normal human being and got angry, yelled. Sometimes I cursed at him. He was cursing at me all the time. And so it's not like I succeeded at this all that well. Sometimes I did. But the worst thing about this is that I beat myself up all the time for reacting like a normal human being, because I wasn't reacting in a way that I felt like was godly. So in Luke 6:27 through 28, let's see, okay. This is Luke's version of the Sermon on the Mount. And it's Jesus is talking, and he said, but I say unto you, which hear, love your enemies, do good to them which hate you. Bless them that curse you, and pray for them which despitefully use you. So that was my goal. That was the way I felt like I was supposed to react, and I was supposed to be able to react. And if I couldn't react that way, I felt like there was something really wrong with me. So that was really hard. It says to love your enemies. Okay, so no matter how much of an enemy he makes of himself to me, I'm supposed to still love him. And I did not succeed in that. And it says, do good to them which hate you. He wouldn't say he hated me, but he acted like he hated me. And I did a lot of good for him. A lot of it was very begrudging, but I did it. But there were times, there were lots of things that I didn't do that were good. And it says, bless them that curse you. And he cursed at me a lot, quite a lot. And I wasn't very good at returning blessings for cursings. I tried. And pray for them which despitefully use you. I did pray for him a lot. Mostly because I wanted him to stop doing the junk he was doing. And so we could somehow have a happy marriage. But it was just, I was not very good at this way of reacting. I was reacting more what we called in our flesh. I was reacting just like a regular person would react to this awful stuff that he was doing to me. And then also, it's basically the same thing in Matthew chapter 5, which is where, let me see, which is Matthew's account of the Sermon on the Mount. Okay, so Matthew 5:44, it says, but I say unto you, love your enemies, bless them that curse you, do good to them that hate you, and pray for them which despitefully use you and persecute you. I felt very used and persecuted by him. Very, very much. I tried to do this. I wasn't all that successful. I failed probably more times than I succeeded. But that was what I was trying to do. But the problem with that, let me read you one more verse. So in Proverbs, let me see. Proverbs. Oh, I can't find it. 15:1. Okay. Now there's something interesting about Proverbs. One thing we were not taught in the church I was in was how to read different books in different ways. We were never taught to read certain books in certain ways. Like Proverbs, like there's books of poetry in the Bible. And you don't read a book of poetry the way you sit down and read a newspaper, right? And there's there's a lot of history in the Bible. That's not the same as the Gospels. Or, each book, there's several different forms of writing in the Bible, but I was never taught that in the cult. Another thing I was never taught specifically about Proverbs. Now, one thing, there is a verse, I didn't look it up, but there's a verse in Proverbs that says, answer a fool according to his folly. And then there's also a verse in Proverbs that says, answer not a fool according to his folly. And I didn't understand that Proverbs are just pieces of good advice that should work in certain situations. But they don't work in every situation. It's not like every single situation, every single verse in Proverbs applies to every single situation. I didn't know that. And the reason it says to answer a fool and then to not answer a fool is in some situations you should answer him, in some situations you shouldn't. So I had, let me see, 15, yeah. Proverbs 15:1 says, a soft answer turneth away wrath, but grievous words stir up anger. And I latched onto that so hard. And I really believed that if I gave him a soft answer when he came at me with his anger and his wrath, that was what God wanted me to do. Well, then I started seeing a therapist, a psychologist, which he didn't know about at first, but then he did. And he told me to stand up to him. He told me to get in his face and yell at him when he was yelling at me. And he had to teach me to do that, and that is what I should do. And I did, and I felt really guilty. But you know what? It worked. He backed off. He's a bully. And like all bullies, if you act weak in front of them, they are going to be more mean to you and pick on you more. But if you act strong in front of them, they'll back down, at least to a degree. So even though I wasn't trying to be weak, I was trying to live the Bible and live how I thought God wanted me to live. But that's how it came off to him, that I was weak. And so he would pound me even more. But when I started doing what my therapist said to do, then he started backing down and some things got better. Also, when I finally told my pastor what was going on, the first thing he said was, you don't have to live that way. That was the second time I left him. The first pastor was worse than no help at all. But anyway, the second pastor, where I was going to church when I was 43, which it was a cult church, but the pastor was actually really reasonable, and the stuff he said made sense. Well, anyway, so he said, you don't have to live that way. And then one of the things I told him is that, I try to live by that verse. And he said, well, sometimes that doesn't work. And you could have knocked me over with a feather, because I didn't know the truth about how to use the things in the book of Proverbs. But he was right. That wasn't working. But because it was the Bible, I was doing the same thing over and over and over and over, even though it wasn't working. And they say that's the definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over and over and over and thinking you're going to get a different result. Well, I never did get a different result. It was the same result over and over and over. And so when I started doing something different, then I got a different result, which makes sense. But I didn't even know I was allowed to do that, because I thought I had to do what the Bible said and everything like that. Even though I'm not saying we don't do what the Bible said. And I'm not saying, like I said in the beginning, I do not want anyone to use these to think that they have to put up with a bunch of crap like I did. And I am not saying that these verses mean that God wants women or men or anybody to put up with being abused, because I don't believe that anymore. But at one time I did, unfortunately. And then one thing that they like to mention is in Malachi 2:16. Okay, it says it in kind of very old-fashioned, confusing language. For the Lord, the God of Israel, saith that he hateth putting away. Now, putting away is an old-fashioned word for divorce. And in the more modern translations, it says he hates divorce. For one covereth violence with his garment, saith the Lord of hosts. Therefore, take heed to your spirit, that ye deal not treacherously. So people love to go around saying, well, God hates divorce. God hates divorce. I've heard that so many times. Well, does God hate abuse? Does God hate one of his children destroying another one of his children? I would say yes, he hates that. So if it's a terrible situation that can't be fixed, and he's not choosing to come down and do some kind of miracle and like make it fixed, then you might have to do an option that God hates, because maybe he hates what the other person is doing to you even more than he hates divorce. I hope he does. I really do. So, and then the last one I want to tell you about is Matthew 10:23. And so I spent a lot of time asking people, what does the Bible say? Not what are you supposed to do when somebody's, treating you like garbage, but what does the Bible say about what you're supposed to do when somebody's treating you bad? And nobody really had an answer. And I used to search the Bible over and over and over, like, God, what do I do? And it was all about like letting, if they hit you on one side of your cheek, let them hit the other. If they want your coat, give them your cloak too. It was all about letting them. That's what it felt like to me. And that was super, super frustrating for me. I felt really tied. I felt trapped because I couldn't find anything in the Bible that would tell me what I should do. And then people say, well, it's just common sense. Well, one of the things we were taught is that common sense and logic have absolutely nothing to do with God and the Bible. So we weren't allowed to use common sense and the Bible. Common sense with the Bible. But then one time I heard somebody preaching. This was after I left the cult, and I started listening to preachers on YouTube during the pandemic, which I left the cult in 2004. So anyway, in Matthew 10:23, so Jesus sent the disciples forth by twos to go and preach and heal people and pray for them. And he's telling them what they should do when they go out, among the places. And so he says, so if they go in a city or village or anything, it says, when they persecute you in this city, flee ye into another. For verily I say unto you, ye shall have not gone over the city of Israel until the Son of Man be come. So he's saying, if you go to a city and they treat you bad, they persecute you, then flee, leave. He's telling them, don't stay there so they can abuse you for 20-something years, which is exactly what I did. He's saying, don't do that. And that is the only thing I've really ever heard or found or had anybody tell me that actually talks about just not letting yourself be treated like garbage. And so I wanted to end with that. I feel like it's like hope. And so, by the way, a YouTube friend of mine who has a very great YouTube channel called Old Soul Like Mine, she reads poetry on her channel, and I really resonate with her poems. They're very powerful, and I can so identify. Unfortunately, we can both kind of identify with each other, and she always comments on my channel. Well, she showed some art on her channel, and we talked about it on her channel, and she asked me to show her some of my art on my channel. So I'm going to show you something from my art journal. I'm going to try to hold it so you can see it. But this is something I made with acrylic paint. I don't know how well you can see that, but this is from my art journal, and I made that with acrylic paint and paint markers. It's stencils, and stamps and all kinds of stuff. So it says, if your dreams don't scare you, they aren't big enough. And I totally agree with that. And my dreams do scare me. Most of all, my dream that scares me the most is writing a memoir and trying to get it traditionally published. I don't know if I'll succeed in getting it traditionally published. At this rate, I don't even know if I'll succeed in writing it. But I believe I will. That does kind of scare me because I just want to tell the truth about everything now. So thank you very much. Thank you for watching my video. And I would love to hear what you have been taught that these verses mean. Because when they use those verses to convince women that they have to put up with all kinds of abuse and not take care of themselves and protect themselves, that's just wrong. They are misusing God's word. They are weaponizing it against women. That makes me very angry. And it's so wrong. You're just at the other person's mercy. It's like if they decide that if they're a good person and they want to treat you good, they do. But if they're not a good person and they don't treat you good, then they have the option of not doing that and having no negative consequences whatsoever. And that's not right. So thank you. Please subscribe to my channel and watch, like and subscribe. And I would really love, and leave me a comment. Most of all, I would love to hear what you guys have to say and turn this from a monologue into a dialogue. And I would love to hear what you were taught that these different verses mean. Thank you very much. Have a good day.